everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar on using data to tell our story. Just quickly share a little background screen that I prepared earlier. Cool, okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all the traditional owners and custodians from across the Kimberley. Here in Kununurra, we're really lucky to be on beautiful Mirrawong country. And one of our speakers, Isaac, is joining us from all the way across in the West Kimberley on Yarra country in Broome. And yeah, I'd like to extend my respect to elders past and present, including anyone who may be online with us today. Thanks for having us. It looks like we've got people joining us from all over the country here today, which is really cool. So feel free to let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat box if you haven't already. So this webinar is facilitated by the team at Waringari Aboriginal Corporation, BBY for short, and we're the backbone organisation for empowered communities in the East Kimberley. So we're a collaboration between 27 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in the East Kimberley, and this webinar is part of a series of activities that we're doing to help our organisations to develop strong and productive relationships and to take leadership in providing services across the Kimberley. So my name's Christine Dane. I'm the data manager at BBY, and my work includes making sure that we've got the data to tell the story of empowered communities in the East Kimberley. So that includes sourcing data from government, but it also includes supporting Aboriginal organisations to collect and use our own data. So we use all this data, government and community data, to make sure that we understand whether the work that we're doing is leading to Aboriginal-led reform and ultimately to better outcomes for Aboriginal communities and families. So today, we are talking about the ways that Aboriginal people and organisations in the Kimberley have used data to tell stories. So stories about their work, about their programs, about their organisations and about their communities. We've got some excellent speakers joining us today. First off, we'll be discussing with Isaac Torres from the Kimberley Aboriginal Health Research Alliance about why using data to tell our stories is important, both for grassroots communities, but also for the national Closing the Gap agenda. And then we'll be speaking to Kathy Cummins from Waringari Aboriginal Arts, who will be sharing stories of how the Arts Centre has been collecting and using data over the course of the past year or so, and what has and hasn't worked in the process and their plans for the future. Unfortunately, Dora Griffiths hasn't been able to join us today. She's stuck across the other side of the NT border, and she sends her apologies. So throughout the conversation, we really encourage and welcome questions and discussion from participants in this chat box. So please make sure your chat box is on. And so you can find that in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to contact any of the speakers during the webinar, just type a message or question into the chat box. You can also put up the hand signal, so you can raise your hand and Jenny will contact you through the chat box to see what your question is. And just lastly, to avoid feedback, your background noise, your microphone's been muted. But of course, if you want to raise your hand or ask a question on anything, we'll unmute it for you. All right. First of all, we'll have Isaac up. Isaac is a Jugun Jabba Jabba and Nguni Yandi man from Broome, and has got many years of experience in various technical roles in information and communications technology. Isaac's current role is the Data Project Coordinator at the Kimberley Aboriginal Health Research Alliance, or KAHRA for short. At the moment, he is studying a Diploma of Digital Enterprise with Charles Darwin University. Hey, Isaac.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So to kick off this discussion, let's get into definitions. Isaac, what do we mean by data?
Yeah, okay, so I've got a bit of a PowerPoint just to give us some background here. So I'll put that on if that's all right, and we can Can you see that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, awesome. So I'll just leave that in the background and we can talk about it. So this is a definition from Cambridge. Information, especially facts or numbers collected to be examined and considered and used to help decision making. So very dry example of what data is. Here in the Kimberley, that data, would generally be things coming from our communities and our organisations, that we want sort of actionable information on. So we can collect that in many different ways, through researchers being involved in our communities, through to just us in our organisations, maybe putting out surveys within our organisations or our communities, and then using that information to maybe run a program or, put it in a funding application or things like that. So.
Yeah, great. And I think you've touched on this here, but data, I think often we assume it means a spreadsheet full of numbers, but also, especially for our communities, it's about the stories that we can tell that, like you said here, inform decision making. And for you, Isaac, why do you think data for Kimberley Aboriginal people is important?
Well, there's a lot of different sort of aspects to the data, again, in the Kimberley. It might be health data, which I'm involved in, using that health data so that we can improve outcomes in our communities. It might be, a particular community wants to know, possibly what an overcrowding situation looks like over there. So that might be environmental health type concerns. It might be how many children are attending school. Being able to put all of that information together and tell a story, for various reasons. Maybe you would like, some more funding for your school, or it might actually be more positive, promoting how well your school is doing. You've got lots of kids coming, attending your programs. You're doing wonderful things out in your community. I think being able to get that and show people, put it together, maybe graphs, charts, data visualizations, those kinds of things to, promote the positive things that are happening in our communities, as well as identifying issues that exist and then being able to use that data to, maybe get some eyes on it, reinforce your ideas.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we see in the bigger, broader space, a lot of data about the Kimberley is based on deficits and the problems are. But if we are able to collect our own data, if we're able to make sure that data is coming from communities, it's much more likely to be positive stories and strengths-based conversations, right? That are leading to potential solutions for issues that we might have on the ground. Okay, so how do you think data can be used to tell stories of the Kimberley?
Well, it's again, I'll bring it back to the health data. It's a project I'm currently working on is trying to create a regional platform that looks at regional data instead of isolated sort of pockets of data. Mainly the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Services data and the WA Country Health Service data, putting those data sets together and coming up with a regional view. So a regional view could possibly enable us to give a much better view of what is actually going on in the Kimberley in terms of primary health. And from that, then use it to, inform future policy decisions on, where we direct our health resources in the Kimberley, as well as, the ongoing use for funding and those kinds of things.
Yeah, great. And I want to touch on a phrase that gets that's been gaining popularity over time or recently is this concept of Indigenous data sovereignty. What does this mean to you, Isaac? Why should data be our data?
Yeah, well, Indigenous data sovereignty, like such a very interesting issue, and it's something that I'd only really encountered since I started my position. So it was in our business plan, I mentioned Indigenous data sovereignty. So I started looking into it, and part of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it mentions data sovereignty. And so, as you can see, like in the background here, I'm just going to read it. Indigenous data sovereignty in Australia refers to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' inherent right to govern their communities, resources, and country, including lands, water, and sky. It is the right of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to exercise ownership over Indigenous data. Ownership of data can be expressed through the creation, collection, access, analysis, interpretation, management, dissemination, and reuse of Indigenous data. Now, that's a lot of big words, but basically what they're talking about is any data generated by Aboriginal people or collected about Aboriginal people should belong to Aboriginal people, and we should be able to use that data. Now, in association with Closing the Gap Priority Reform 4, which is all about access to government data and for Aboriginal organisations to access that and use the same data that the government departments have about Aboriginal people. You know, it's you can see how this starts becoming very important. You know, obviously, closing the gap is a big step, and this is probably the first time we've seen, all of the governments sign up for something like this, and it's very new. So there's no kind of roadmaps out there on how Indigenous data sovereignty and Priority Reform 4 interact. But Priority Reform 4 gives us a good lever to, when we speak to government, to try and get access to that information so that we can use it to make decisions as well.
Exactly, and you touched on the fact that there's no roadmaps, especially no roadmaps specifically for the Kimberley to figure out how Indigenous data sovereignty should look in this region. So I think it's more important than ever now that we're having this conversation and trying to start figuring out and discuss what it means for our organisations to be collecting and using and all of these words, these actions about data. Have you got anything else to add, Isaac?
No, we could talk about this stuff all day. It's a very complex issue, and but if anyone would like to talk about it, I'll just put up that contact info, and if there's things that you'd like to discuss, feel free to get in contact with me through that email address, and we can share resources or things like that, because it's still all very new and very complex.
I can confirm that Isaac can talk about this for hours on end. I have been in a room with him when that's happened. And it's great. Just wanted to open up to the participants a little bit. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Isaac? Feel free to jump into the chat box and I'll read it out for you. Or raise your hand. So Sam, hi Sam. Sam's got a question for you, Isaac. Oh, is he gone? Oh, no, yeah, sorry. Isaac, how does community collected data stay in community?
Okay, so this comes back to, what do we call it? Usage, access, and sharing agreements, those kinds of things. So depending on your organisation, you might actually have identified data policies, data retention, data lifecycle, those kinds of things where you might have already mapped these things out. So according to the data, Indigenous data sovereignty principles, there's a few different ones. One that we're kind of working with at the moment, what they call the KAHRA principles. I don't actually have those to hand to sort of read them out, but basically data should stay with the organisation and the community that generates it. There's lots of different ways that might happen. You might have a paper-based storage system. You might have a database or an Excel spreadsheet just on a computer. You might have a very large project that might require something like Microsoft Azure data center, something like that, which possibly, my data project will require something quite that large. And in that case, we will have a steering committee that works on all those data sharing, access, usage agreements, and those kinds of things. So we work on the fact that it's ground up, community driven, community owned, and it's all about the community themselves, organizations that, control that access, control who gets to use it, and all those kinds of things. So, yeah, really depends on your organisation and how your community want to do it. I know BBY have some great resources on how you can do those kinds of things. So, yeah, check out their website. There's good stuff there.
Cool. Thanks, Isaac. We've got a few more questions coming in. There's one from Darren. Question for Isaac. Are there any blackfellas running data centres to avoid data being stored with non-Aboriginal communities or companies?
Oh, that's a great question. I am not 100% aware of anyone running data centres. I know there's an organisation in WA that does a lot of stuff with geo mapping and things like that. I don't know whether they have their own data center or whether they're using something like Microsoft or Amazon Web Services. Would be very interesting to check that out. I'd thought about doing something like that a long time ago, but the big players, when it comes to security and things like that, you have to really be on top of it. And I don't know whether or not trying to have a data center and managing access to potentially private data, like I'll bring it back to health data, but that's needs to be kept very secure. But I'd love to see something like that in the future for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we'll do one last question just quickly from Jackson. Thanks, Jackson. So Isaac, do you think data sovereignty goes hand in hand with empowerment of community and evening the power dynamics with government or NGOs that may be coming into community?
100%. I do think that. It definitely flips the power dynamic. One of the things the organisation that I work for, KAHRA, is trying to achieve is putting the power of research back into the hands of the community. So things like, when a researcher comes to the Kimberley, are they looking at the priorities that we have in our region? Is the project that you want to do, is that actually benefiting anyone here? And, by the same token, that data that gets generated out of that research, how does that come back and inform our communities, who holds the ownership of that data? That's a very interesting thing that we're exploring at the moment, and that's why Indigenous data sovereignty is like at the forefront of many of the things that we're now looking at. And Darren, yeah, Winyama, that's who I was talking about. Good pickup.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Isaac. Thanks for the questions from the group as well. We're going to slide into our next speaker. So we'll be hearing from Kathy Cummins about an example of how an East Kimberley community-based Aboriginal organisation is thinking about collecting, going about having their own data. And it's a really interesting story that I'm really excited to have the opportunity to hear about. So Kathy Cummins is the manager for Waringari Aboriginal Arts. And Waringari Aboriginal Arts is the lead agency for the Kimberley Arts Project that she'll be speaking about with us today. Hi, Kathy. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks.
Yeah, as you indicated before, I'm really sorry my chair, Dora Griffiths, is not with us. She's stuck on the other side of the border, but I will do my best to relay the thoughts and ideas that she has shared with me.
Thank you. Before we start, can you tell us about the painting that you've got in the background there?
Yes, this is a very beautiful Mary Theresa Taylor painting from Kira artists in Columbaroo. So yes, I did set myself up with that one in the background. And Kira is part of Waringari Aboriginal Arts.
Great. Okay, so can you tell us a bit about the projects that you've been evaluating?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll give you a little bit of a background about Waringari Arts. It's the first Indigenous owned art centre established in Western Australia and one of the longest operating art centres in the country. And since 2009 has been collaborating with the other art centres across the Kimberley to develop projects that would strengthen Kimberley culture and provide benefit to artists of the region. So the project that we've been working on for the past couple of years, the Winan Intergenerational Learning Project, has in this iteration was brokered for us by KAHRA and supported by BBY to gather data and an evidence base for the ways that art centres contribute to strengthening social cultural benefits and health wellbeing. So this project has been funded through the WA Primary Health Alliance, and yeah, it's been an amazing project in terms of what art centres usually work on, and we are at the tail end of our first 2 years of operating the project and have come up with some great learning, very challenging, some of it, but amazing activities that have been produced as a result of the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been conducting this evaluation over the last year or so. What was the process to develop that evaluation?
Initially, the project set about delivering activities that would strengthen social, cultural wellbeing benefits. That's something that art centres are really good at. It's what we do all the time, but it's very rarely recognised that that's what art centres are continuously doing in the background, when the models that have been previously proposed by government are really a kind of production model where I think it's a bit of a emphasis is on painting, manufacture and sale, as opposed to the real work, which is strengthening cultural identity, passing on knowledge to the next generations, and that each painting is in fact a store of cultural knowledge. And so that's the critical work that art centres actually do. So the activity delivery of the project we were really great at, and the challenge was for us to actually provide evidence, so strength-based evidence, data collection, that we would be able to share that story of building and strengthening cultural practice with others. And I guess the longer term intention of it is that we have a story to tell for advocacy to government, and a story to tell for funders and philanthropic investment, so that the work that art centres do can keep being done.
Great. So you said that there's been good and bad in this process. Can you maybe start off with talking about what some of the challenges have been to collecting this data and what lessons you've learned?
Yeah, so as I said, easy to deliver wonderful activities, and very easy for managers and those around art centres to understand that there's been an impact, but how to collect that information has been quite challenging. And art centres are predominantly under-resourced, so there's a shortage of staffing in order to be able to effectively find someone who can collect the data. What the biggest challenge was for our art centres. So the Kimberley Art Centres working together, there's 5 art centres, in this particular project, and that's Mowajam Arts from Derby, Munkaja Arts from Fitzroy Crossing, Walayurdi Artists from Belgo Hills, Warman Arts Centre from Warman Turkey Creek, and Waringari Arts from Kununurra, and Kira Kiro as part of the Waringari project that's based in Columbaroo. So 5.5 art centres really. Collecting data from individual participants was our biggest challenge, and I guess that's been around what questions do you ask artists? What questions do you ask community that they feel comfortable answering? And that's been quite a serious challenge, and I think needs a lot more work. We've come up with some feedback forms. We've readdressed those feedback forms a number of times, trying to find a way that it was meaningful for a participant to complete that feedback. And that obviously varies across the region. So what we've found is that Walayurdi and Belgo found it really difficult to collect data. One, they're an under-resourced art centre. English is definitely not a first language, and many of the desert people were unfamiliar with how to record feedback. Waringari has had a better time at that at the other end of the scale, because we have a lot more staff on the ground, and Dora, my chair, has taken responsibility for gathering that data and sitting down with participants and hearing their story. So I think the biggest challenge is finding the right questions to ask a participant so that they feel quite comfortable about responding. And we are still on the journey of working out how to do that. Our current iteration of collecting data is some mobile phone videos, and that's really about asking someone pre an activity and post an activity how they felt, whether that has that activity has helped strengthen their cultural identity, whether that activity has been meaningful, and kind of trying to draw out responses from a participant in a kind of a less mathematical function. In the end, we realise that we're going to have to add up all of this data, but what we hope is that we will have some really strong qualitative stories that will demonstrate the effects on 5 to 10 participants from each art centre.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, questions about cultural well-being and the effect of an activity on who your own identity is difficult enough without being filmed asking it, right? So I can totally understand why it's such a challenge and something that we're constantly working on. But good on you for giving it a go. And it sounds like having Dora lead this work as well has been really effective, having the right leadership behind it.
Absolutely. And I think the critical thing is knowing the right questions to ask. And I think someone who's part of the community can ask those questions in a better way that is less threatening and more likely to get a response that is truthful and meaningful for that participant.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, on the flip side, what has worked well? What are your wins and successes?
Obviously, the activity delivery. We've delivered 150 activities over the past 2 years. And those activities range from on-country trips to schools, cultural engagement workshops, to one-on-one support between an arts worker or artist and their family. So how all of those activities have worked. We added to monthly activity reporting, which was a requirement by WAFA for the funding, a manager's evaluation, and so that has been really good. We have been very good at having our monthly Zoom meetings and a couple of regional meetings a year in order to get discussion, planning, look at our challenges between art centre managers and directors of each of the art centres so that we can do that. I think we're good at that. And now we're doing the interview process. We'll see how that goes. And the final stage will be to draw all that information together and see what have we got. Which activities did we deliver that provided participants with the best outcomes are the ones that participants want to do. So not the ones necessarily driven by funding, but the activities that community feels is important and valuable for strengthening culture into the future.
It must be so useful to have this backlog of data now that you can look back on and use to make that decision, right?
Yeah, I hope so. And I think that out of this project, we will definitely have some important data that can be contributed towards any closing the gap data, as well as ensuring that we have a strong argument for art centres to continue doing the work they do.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you see as the benefits of Kimberley Art Centres collecting their own data for this project?
I can see the benefit really clearly for Waringari. I can see that having really strong evidence for the activities we deliver strengthens our relationship with funders and strengthens our relationships with our growing group of friends and philanthropists. I feel that some of our other art centres are still on that journey, and so I think it's quite critical to support that journey for the other art centres. It will provide in some ways, evidence of resourcing. So I think that's been quite a critical outcome, is that we can see that where an art centre is resourced, they can collect the data. Where an art centre is not resourced, they are unable to. And I think that is probably a message back to the art centre funding bodies, that you need to be able to resource adequately with staff so that you can get, a clear picture of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you see for the potential, the future potential for this data and these stories that you're collecting?
I think art centres have been on a trajectory for quite some time in developing business acumen and professionalism and respect across government sectors, and this kind of evaluation work and data collection will further contribute to that. So I think that art centres, those who know art centres know that they do really good work, and this is just backing that up so that across government that's realised. I think this opportunity to work with WAFA and CAMS has been amazing for them to also see what is being achieved, and so that builds greater regional partnerships. It builds confidence across government sectors. And I think the more that cross-sector involvement in what's happening in our region, as well as in other regions, will continue to strengthen outcomes and respond better to what Aboriginal people and communities are asking for.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's having the evidence to back up a way of working that we know works well, but to convince others on a larger scale, this is the way things need to be done, and this is what communities are asking for. Yeah. Great. Thanks so much for sharing, Kathy. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No. I thank you for the opportunity. I'll probably give Isaac a call. I think he might be able to help me out a little bit. So yeah, no, that's it. Thank you.
Great. We've got a little bit of time now for any participants. If you've got any questions for Kathy, feel free to pop them into the chat box.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned videos using your mobile phones, I believe. How do you collate all that?
At this point, where the data gatherers, I am currently speaking with someone from Curtin University, hoping they'll work out how we collate that. But I think critically what will come out of it is there will be key statements that we will be looking at in those recordings. So, you know, I last week I actually recorded one of our arts workers here. He's been working at the Arts Centre, I think just since the start of COVID, and I've observed him really grow in confidence and capability, and it's been quite outstanding to watch what's happened to him. So I wanted to interview him, and in doing that, his comments were really around, I've found my people. So for him, it was an opportunity to engage with his arts practice, which had always been in his background, but never really supported, and to engage in a context and an environment that was really culturally supportive. So I would hope that those statements that will be generated from the interviews will be the key messages that we will be able to share with the broader public in terms of what the project's delivery has achieved.
Yeah, wonderful.
Sounds like a lot of transcribing. Great. So we've got a question from Julia. Hey, Julia. Kathy, is there a lot of variation in the types of data stories that are collected across the art centres?
The one in common is that trips to country, where knowledge is shared between cultural elders and younger people, are predominantly successful, and that's across all art centres. And then in amongst that, there are different individual stories depending on the types of activity delivery each art centre does. So one of our activities that we deliver at Waringari is in partnership with OVAS, the Ord Valley Aboriginal Health Service, and they bring a group of NDIS clients with them each week, and we deliver arts engagement activities. And one of the lovely stories about that was our facilitator was away because of a funeral, and they had forgotten to call the group to say don't come, and they came anyway. And the particular group actually went and got all their own gear off the shelves, sorted themselves out, and their supervisor or their project worker couldn't believe that. So it was a positive story generated by, I think, what is a really culturally safe space, and that has generated capability for a group of people that wouldn't otherwise have kind of perhaps felt that comfortable. So another art centre has been working with, they do a lot of work with aged care, and they bring elderly people from the aged care home into the art centre, and that has allowed their family to more fully reconnect with that particular elder artist. And that's then generated not only really important benefits for the elder who's able to actually have greater connection with their family, but it's meant that the broader family members are able to come in and learn stories from that artist. And that's quite critical, because passing on cultural knowledge is what strengthens cultural identity and provides opportunities for next generations. So they're the kind of stories, and that's the sort of variation that we're working with. And
sounds like
hopefully we'll tell a proper big story.
Yeah, it sounds like there are so many really interesting and exciting and empowering stories that you're hiding in your little database now. I'm really looking forward to that big story being told. Okay, we'll do one more question from Darren. So he says, fantastic work from what he's heard. Is it difficult to find fellows to transcribe with so many different languages being spoken by participants, I guess, across all the art centres? There's a lot of different language groups.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and certainly one that I've realised in our data collection of participant feedback, particularly with the Desert Mom from the Balgo Hills. I really think that the feedback sheets or processes that we've had until recently have been alienating for that group, and what we really need to do is make sure that there's appropriate ways for collecting feedback with the other art centres, and that's because we have it at Waringari. I've been really encouraging the other managers, don't you do the data collection or the feedback, get one of the arts workers or one of the artists to actually do that, so that the language is right, so that there's kind of a feeling of safety and an ability to respond effectively. So I do think that while the transcribing for the art centres that speak English is not really the key issue, it's about interpreting the feedback so that someone has the opportunity to say what they're thinking and fully understand the question. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, and if we bring it back to that idea of data sovereignty and data ownership, it's not just about who's holding the data, but it's who's collecting it, who's giving it, and making sure that in the case of Indigenous data sovereignty, it's Aboriginal people in the Kimberley specifically who are in charge of the process all throughout. Yeah.
And it's critical, because otherwise the data's not going to be meaningful.
Exactly.
Data's going to follow along the lines of another kind of government-driven process, and it's got to tell the right story and a truthful story, so that it has actually long-term benefit. Yeah,
for sure. Oh, well, congrats on the work that you're doing, Kathy. It's so exciting to hear about.
Yeah, it's a great project. Thank you.
Okay, so we're almost at time here, but I wanted to use the last 10, 15 minutes or so to get both Isaac and Kathy to sort of talk about how they've used data to advocate for change, or how data or stories that we're collecting can, make a difference in these communities that we work and live in and are part of. So Kathy, I'll go to you first. Do you have an example that you'd like to share about how you guys have been using data to make change?
I suppose the biggest change is actually getting some funding out of the health department. Mm-hmm. So art centres have known for quite a long time that the work they do, as I mentioned before, it's not just a production model of economics where you make art and you sell art. It's actually about the social cultural well-being, and that's quite critical. So this precedes the collection of data. The next thing that's been really quite important, I think, is actually convincing each of the managers that this is really valuable work, because it will contribute to a bigger story to make sure that art centres are delivering, in fact, on cultural imperatives, not just economic imperatives, because our primary work should always be the health of the community, and cultural well-being is paramount to that. And so collecting the data is definitely starting to demonstrate that to the managers within the group of art centres that are working towards an outcome together.
Yeah, and I just think that's so significant, being able to prove that the work that art centres do is contributing to cultural wellbeing, to health and wellbeing outcomes. That opens you up to so much more support and funding from, you know, a number of government agencies and philanthropic funders as well.
And it's not just about the funding. We need the funding for sure, but I think it's critically about, you know, the empowerment of community members and what their needs are in order to maintain that journey of empowerment. And by looking at the data, listening to the stories, getting the feedback, that's the only way we can actually make sure we stay on the right track.
Exactly, and it's just so critical that we're on that track, right? Great, thank you. Isaac, over to you. How are you and your work using data to advocate for a change in your community?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm in health, and the data that we're talking about has existed for quite a while, and there's already many reports generated out of that data. But for us, it'll be the first time that community-owned data and government data exist in the same place. And so once, you know, all the appropriate access and all of that sort of stuff is sorted out, all of our governance, and all of, you know, the data cleansing and all of that sort of stuff takes place, we should be able to see a true representation of the Indigenous population of the Kimberley, at least those who access primary health services in the Kimberley. It's anticipated that quite possibly we could have a better set of stats than ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, has on our population. And, you know, we can see what maybe the relationships between primary health and, you know, the secondary, like hospital, how all of that interacts. So, you know, it's all about improving those health outcomes for Kimberley people. And I think that's the most exciting thing. Pretty much, if it's done right, we could be using this platform for years to set that agenda. And so very powerful. I'm very lucky to be involved in this project.
Exactly, and it's about the alliance that you're working for, Kimberley Aboriginal Health Research Alliance, and more broadly, Kimberley Aboriginal communities and organisations and people setting that agenda that you're talking about, because that's data that you guys have access to. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, it's the data that we will have access to is all governed by those community organisations. So, you know, again, they haven't even given us access yet. So that's one of the hurdles that I've got coming up, is convincing everyone that this is a worthwhile project. But so far, everyone thinks it is. So, yeah, it's you know, it goes back to those Indigenous data sovereignty principles and those kinds of things. So, you know, all ground up, all you know, very upfront, very transparent about the process that we're taking, and making sure that everyone is comfortable with the process going forward, so that, you know, there are no sort of hidden agendas or any of that kind of thing. It's just all, you know, community, tell us what you want.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm not sure if you touched on it before, but could you tell participants the name of the project that you're working on?
Oh, sorry, was that for me?
Yes, for you guys.
Oh, yeah, sorry. My project is, or the project I'm working on is the Kimberley Health Evidence Data Platform. So, yeah, that's with all of the Kimberley Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Services, and WA Country Health is involved. And so, yeah, big project.
Yeah, huge project. Great. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time left for questions. Do any of the participants have any other questions for our panelists? So we've got one from Vicky. Hi, Vicky. Any Commonwealth government listening today? Who is getting this message? Great question. If any Commonwealth government employees would like to expose themselves, or put up your hands, feel free to start that conversation. But yeah, obviously this is a message that we're hoping doesn't just stay within the Aboriginal community controlled sector. We know that we need to own our own data. We know that we need to set our own agenda. But it's about getting it out to the wider world, right? To where the funding comes from, where decisions are made. Yeah,
well, one thing I can say is that we are funded by the federal government using the Medical Research Future Fund. They set aside some funds for us to get this happening, but obviously we're working, with the state government department to try and make this a reality. So, Priority Reform 4 of closing the gap, access to data. As far as I'm aware, that's a conversation that they're willing to have. And obviously, it's something that we'll be pushing quite strongly. Yeah,
definitely. Any other questions from the panelists? Kathy's asking Darren if he knows how much he arts in Geraldton.
He does.
Yeah, great. Any other questions from panelists? Nope. All good? All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I want to leave you with a few tidbits that BBY are doing to support the data space. So first of all is the BBY data service. So that's something that you can find on our website, but basically for Kimberley Aboriginal community controlled organisations, we're really keen to support the way that you are navigating the data system. We know there's a lot out there, it's difficult to find, but feel free to submit any requests. For example, like what's the population of Wyndham, or how many people are employed in Kununurra, questions like that. We're really happy to help you, support you to get access to data like that. So that's the BBY data service, which you can find on our website. And then upcoming, if you're in the East Kimberley, we're holding some skills workshops in the next couple of weeks around how to think about and plan your programming and evaluation. So learning about how to collect and analyse and store data to make more evidence-informed decisions and advocate for change. So that's just some things that we're doing here in the East Kimberley coming up. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I personally have really enjoyed being able to tap into both of your perspectives, Isaac and Kathy. And thanks to all the attendees for joining us as well. All right, until next time.
Thank you.